Hey everyone, welcome back to Mason Woodshop. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at two of the best 10-inch miter saws on the market today. Over here, we have the Makita LS1019L, and this actually replaced my Bosch Glide 10-inch miter saw. And I had a video comparison that I'll link to above, where I put those two head to head. And while the Bosch Glide was a great saw, the Makita LS1019L had many creature comforts that I think just made it a better saw for me. But what's funny in that video is I actually have a little clip I'm going to play now. And who knows, in a couple of years, maybe I'll go to the Festool Kapex. So isn't it funny that 2 years almost to the day, the Festool Kapex 120 REB ends up in my shop. And it was funny because I actually hadn't rewatched that video for 2 years. So I went back and watched it today. It was kind of a funny reminder that there is kind of always that lingering 2-year cycle of like, is there something better? And I think that that's one of the reasons why the Festool Kapex ended up in my shop now. There are a few reasons, and I think the Makita has been great. It gives me pretty good precision, pretty good adjustability, but I just always wanted it to be a little simpler. I don't have a lot of time in my shop with a busy 6-year-old running around the house, but when I do, I just want things to work. I don't want to think too much about settings. I just want to be able to flip some switches and be ready to go. So the Kapex has kind of been that curiosity. So I think while there have been some limitations with the Makita, it's just that curiosity and that desire to try out the Kapex that has brought it into the shop today. But without further ado, let's take a look and compare some of the key features of both of these saws. Then at the end, I'll just give you my final thoughts. This isn't meant to be a detailed scientific review. I'm not going to be weighing the amount of sawdust or anything like that, but I am going to highlight some of the key feature differences between the two. So let's first talk a little bit about some of the ergonomics and as far as setting the miter angles. So both of these saws are very easy to move around. The Makita actually has a little bit better range. So it can actually go from 60 degrees on the left to 60 degrees on the right. The Kapex is 50 degrees on the left and 60 degrees on the right. Now, both of these saws are kind of best in class regarding that. So while there are positive stops along here, the system for setting the miters, the positive stops on it for both of them are in metal. So again, kind of a nice step up from the Bosch. So very similar with how you can set the miters on these two saws. Now on the Festool, to release the head, there's a little pin over on the right that I can pull to release. And then you have to pull this trigger in order to bring the head of the saw down. So you can see there. And then to actually turn it on, depress the safety mechanism, pull the trigger, and you're good to go. Now on the Makita, pretty similar, but there's a little pin over on the right that we need to set there, but there's free movement of it. And I think that that's one of the things that I do like better about the Makita. As far as putting the saw on, there's a little bit of a safety trigger there, and then a big trigger on the back. And if you are left-handed, you may find the Makita a little bit difficult to use just with the position of that, whereas the Kapex is really good with either hand. Shows no, like excellent, it's not excellent for either, but it's fully compatible with both. One of the other things that I do want to highlight, and I think that this definitely does favor the Makita a little bit, is the size of the beds. So the Festool one is perfectly flat, put a straight edge down there, and you can also release the extension wings like that, perfectly flat all the way across. There is a little bit of a drop when it comes to the insert right here, but perfectly flat. Now the Makita isn't perfectly flat. It does start to kind of taper down just a little bit as you get closer, but look at the surface area differences. And I think that the Makita is more of a one-off with this because the Bosch Glide was very similar to the Festool setup. And I just think that there's just something different about the table with the Makita. So while I don't think I get a lot of use out of it, I'm not typically cutting 12-inch wide material, so this extra extension right here is not going to give me a lot of benefit. There is a little bit of creature comfort when it does come to that. So I did want to highlight that as far as the ergonomics go. Now, let's talk about the fence systems. And I think that this is something where the Makita one was quite disappointing when compared to the Bosch Glide. So there is a screw on the back that you can unscrew, but this doesn't slide. It just has to come off. So there's no kind of ability to slide that, which is pretty common for most miter saws. Now on the Festool, there's a simple latch on the back. You can slide it over and then push that down. And to remove the fence from the Festool, and this is also kind of one of my weird complaints about the Festool, there's this little screw, and you just screw it down a little bit, and you can slide it off. So that's fine, but Festool usually has little toggles and that kind of stuff. So having a screw with a random 2.5mm hex wrench or Allen key included in the packaging that has no place to be stored on here is kind of an odd move from Festool. And that's one of the interesting things with it. I've noticed that a lot of the screws on here, some are T15 Torx, some are T20 Torx. There are other ones where there is, for the blade change, there is an Allen key on the back, so that is on board. And just kind of strange that they don't have onboard tool storage for all of the little tools that they typically need to break down this saw. So I think for the fence, I would give this one to the Kapex. Now let's take a look at the hold down systems. Okay, so now the hold down on the LS1019L is pretty decent, and this is so much better than the Bosch Glide and so much better than kind of what you see on a lot of miter saws, but it is still a little cumbersome to use. And see, you just gotta spend your time screwing it down. It does give you pretty good flexibility as to where it's going to hold down, but screw it down. And there we go. Now I could have just kind of slid a little bit up there and it would hold down as well. So there is some good flexibility with where you can put this, but it is a little cumbersome to use. Now, conversely, let's take a look at the Festool. So now Festool is very different, and it has this clamping system right here. And you simply insert it in the back, swing it around, release the lever, put that down, and it holds. Let's just push it down a little more, holds. It holds really, really well. Now you don't have the maneuverability other than a little bit of side to side there that you do with the Makita, but this system is so much better to use, and watching other videos comparing various saws, this really does seem to be best in class. So I'll give the hold down a slight advantage to the Kapex over the Makita. All right, so we've talked about setting the miter, but what about the bevel? And both of these are dual bevel miter saws, meaning that they can go both ways. Now let's just remove the fence for this. All right, now that we've got that removed, so the Makita is pretty good, and the Bosch Glide was absolutely horrendous. Not only was it very cumbersome to move around, it was also really top heavy. Now here, we just have simple instructions. We can unlock the bevel, and we can go 48 degrees to the left, and then we can also, it'll stop at 0. We can press this little button, go slightly that way, then over, and we can go 48 degrees this way. So kind of nice that you can get that 48 degrees. Now, I rarely go over probably like 45.5. So if I am back beveling or doing something like that, very rarely do I go over 45.5. So while it is nice to have, it's not something that is completely necessary. Oh, and when you do get to the angle that you want, you simply twist this and you lock it down and you're good. Okay, let's get it back to 0. So now the beveling on the Festool, I think, is just best in class. It is more limited because it goes 47 on the left, 47 on the right, which is still really, really good. I think the Makita's is more of an outlier in going to 48, but the way it works is very cool. So we flip this bevel lock, and then there's a dial on the back, and it has 3 settings: 0 to 45, which is on where it is right now, which allows me to go 45 degrees to the left, or back to 0. Then it will lock in, or 45 degrees to the right. So it'll do 40 and 40 with a positive stop at 0. And then we can also go to 47 degrees, which is gonna let us go 47 degrees each way. And then we find the angle that we want, like let's say we want 35. We can just lock it down, and then it is locked in place. Now, what's super cool about the Festool is, first of all, it's not very heavy moving from side to side, but you also see as I move it, this is rotating. And this acts as a fine adjustment so that you can really kind of dial in that bevel angle that you want. And what you'll also notice, let me just set this back to that, is the size of the scale on the back. So just so different from what you see on the Makita. So another feature that I actually use pretty regularly on my saws is the ability to trench. And what that means, let me just release this head, is to have the blade bottom out above the base of, or the plate of the saw. So this allows you to put in a rabbet or a dado, something along those lines. And both saws have this capability. And on the Makita, there's this little thing that you move over there, and that just basically moves a piece of metal in the way, and then you can dial in kind of the height of the blade. So right now you can see I'm pulling that down all the way, and that's as far as it's going. So if I want to do almost like a 1-inch trench, that would work. And then when I'm done trenching, I can just push that to the side, and then it comes down in its normal place. So it does work reasonably well on the Makita. Just flip that over, dial it in. Now it is a little simpler on the Festool. So what we can do is we can, so like right now I just want to show you that it's going all the way down, but we can flip this little green pin forward, and now you'll see that right now it's about 1/2 inch, 3/8 of an inch down or above the base, and then we can dial it in, and there you'll see the blade moving up. So giving me that little bit of precision, and then I can just flip this back, and then it's back to being a normal saw, and then back down, and it's trenching again. So a little simpler to use on the Festool, a little bit of a creature comfort there, but both saws are very capable of it. Now, something I did miss on both of these at the beginning is the sliding mechanism. So they both have these forward rails, and I think that that's really kind of what draws me to both of these saws, and it's what drew me to the Bosch Glide in the first place, is its ability to get bumped up right to the edge of a wall. So it gives you a good amount of space savings and allows you to essentially, let's release that, pull the saw forward, which is really quite nice and handy. And on the Makita, it's essentially just as easy, where there's a little pin right there and allows you to pull forward. Now, the Makita does have the 2 rails on the side, whereas the Festool had them on each end of the head of the saw. And there is one small thing that is annoying about the Makita as far as saving that space behind. And let me just release the head right here. It is this dust port. And I'll get to the dust extraction in just a moment, but if you have a vacuum or dust extractor hooked in there and you tilt it back, the hose comes back 2 or 3 inches past the back of the saw. So you can't back the saw all the way up to the wall. You can only back it up 2 or 3 inches away because you have to make room for the dust extractor, which is a little bit annoying. So before we get to dust extraction, I do just want to highlight some of the cutting capacities on the saw. So both of these are able to cut essentially 2x12 pieces of dimensional lumber. Actually, even ignoring the dimensional part, it can actually cut up to 12 inches or just slightly above. It can also cut up to almost 3 inches tall on both of these saws. So both of them have an overall cut capacity that really does rival almost any 12-inch miter saw on the market, despite these being 10-inch miter saws. What's also really cool with both of these saws, and let me just move this workpiece out of the way, and that is that they have what's called a special cutting position. And what that does, and what we can do is we can turn on the slider, we can flip this piece down, butt it back there. And what that does is it opens up the back of the blade so that you can actually cut material on the Makita, I think up to 4¼ inches tall at the back. So if you're doing really tall trim and that sort of thing, that really kind of gives you really nice capacity. And I think that many of us that have done a lot of trim work know it's much better to cut the miters when you do have it going standing up rather than putting it on the surface. It gives you a much nicer cut and makes it easier to back bevel and do that sort of thing. So that special cutting height is definitely really handy. Now, the Festool, when it comes to the special cutting height, is also very similar in that, let's set that pin back, turn on the slider, you can flip this switch. And what is nice is, like on Festool tools, most of the time if something's green, that means that it has a function. Hold that down, bump the saw back, and now it has opened up that back part of the blade, and this part goes up as well, so that you can cut material up to 4¾ inches tall. So a little bit less than the Makita, although if you're cutting 5-inch trim, I mean, you can do it on the Makita, you can't do it on the Festool. Both of these saws, I'm not going to go through an example because I don't have the accessory, but they do have add-on accessories that allow you to cut really quite impressive crown molding. So they'll have nested crown molding that's coming down on an angle and it has a little bit of support that allows you to cut crown molding up just over 6 inches long. So both saws, very similar capabilities when it does come to cutting crown molding. So now everyone seems to want to have a laser on their saw, but every saw is built differently with how useful these lasers are. So the Makita does have a laser line, and it's pretty good. So I have found that much better than any other miter saw that I've used on the market. It basically shows it over here, and you're essentially not cutting into the laser. So any material on the laser is going to not be cut away, but anything overhanging that laser is going to be cut away. This is where the Festool does excel. So what you'll see is that there's a dual laser line, and what this does is it essentially shows you on either side of the material what is and what is not going to be cut away. So very similar to the Makita, but a little bit more helpful, and I think one of the features of this saw that a lot of people get drawn to. So now as far as dust extraction is concerned, the Makita is really kind of one of the best in class, significantly better than the Bosch and a lot better than many of the other mass market saws on the market. And what you'll see is that there's one big dust shroud down there, huge dust shroud, really nice rubber, and then another one right here alongside the blade. And both of those are connected via a hose to only require one dust port. And what's great is that the Makita is compatible with the Festool dust extractors. Now, this isn't going to be a scientific examination, but I am going to cut a piece of 11 3/4 inch MDF, 3/4 inch thick, 11 3/4 inch long. So I am going to cut this, and you can just take a look at how the dust is being sucked up in the back. Whew, cutting MDF is going to be dusty regardless of how good the extraction is on there. So hopefully you can see a little bit more detail on the screen. Okay, and now on the Festool, there is but one of like really nice rubber shrouds here. It can be folded back if you need to make room when doing those special cuts on the back, but Festool is known for their dust extraction. Now, from what I've read online, these two saws are a bit of a toss-up, but let's do the same cut with the Festool. So pretty good job. Kind of anecdotally based on what I'm seeing there, I'd say that the Festool was a little bit better. I think that this shroud following the blade and being closer does have its benefits, while the Makita does have the bigger shroud on the back and then the smaller one right by the blade. So now the Festool Kapex does have one more party trick, and that is this accessory off the back. And this is their MireFast angle finder. And I've been playing around with this a little bit, and it is so cool. What you do is you put this into the corner of a room or kind of whatever you're trying to cut. And if you're doing an inside corner, you do that. If you're doing an outside corner, you simply extend these to get that angle. Just knowing that in a house, most of the time you're not dealing with a perfect 90-degree angle. It might be 88 degrees, might be 94 degrees. And so with this, you can get that perfectly. Then what you do is you dial this in to lock it, put it on the miter saw like that, turn on the laser, and then you turn the miter saw until the laser line is lined up perfectly on either side of this dashed line on the top of this. Then what you do is lock in your miter and you make your cuts. So cool, removes the idea of math when it comes to doing inside and outer miters. All right, so we've run through a wide variety of features on both of these saws. I think the reality is they're both incredible saws. For 9 out of 10 of you watching, the LS1019L is probably even gonna be overkill. Now, I've gone through a series of miter saws in my short term as a home improvement DIYer, woodworker, cabinet maker, that sort of thing. I've gone from the big 12-inch DeWalt that I bought initially, and it was just so big and so heavy, to a tiny little Metabo, then to the Bosch Glide, then to the Makita, and now to the Festool. So 9 out of 10 of you, this is going to be overkill. For those of you that are looking for one of the best miter saws on the market with a really good creature comforts, the Makita, I think, is going to be the one for you to go with. Now, for those of you that are less concerned about the cost and are looking for just the apex of miter saws, the Kapex from Festool is just going to be the best saw that you can possibly get. So if you were looking for a 10-inch miter saw with amazing cut capacity that rivals many 12-inch saws on the market and you just want the best, that's the Kapex. So as far as cost of these two saws, so right now in Canada, the Makita not on sale is about $900. Now it can be found on sale for about $600 every once in a while. That's Canadian dollars. So we're talking probably like $600 down to $450 US dollars. The Festool, it is $22.95 Canadian or $16.99 US dollars. It is a huge premium on a miter saw of this standard. So is it worth triple the price? For most of you, probably not. For me, probably not. But am I going to get a lot of joy and pleasure out of having this in the shop? When I clean it up, when I do my maintenance on it, am I going to just enjoy it a little bit more on the Festool than I would on the Makita? Absolutely. I think that's one of the main reasons why I've introduced so much Festool in the shop. While I love woodworking, I love putting out content, my main hobby is playing around with cool tools and cool technology. So I think that's really kind of one of my main hobbies, is just playing around with the best of the best. How can you fiddle around with it and just get that perfection? And for me, that's why the Festool Kapex is my saw of choice. So I am planning to do a full review video in a few months on the Festool Kapex after I go through a handful of projects. I'm really excited to put it to use in the shop and really kind of see if it makes my woodworking any better or if it just makes my hobby of looking at and fiddling around with tools just that much more enjoyable. So stay tuned for more videos soon, and thank you so much for watching. If you haven't watched my video comparing the Makita and the Bosch Glide, please do check that out. I'll have links in the description as well as at the end of this video. So again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in another video soon.